Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to discuss the farce that was the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Florida. Now, I did not attend the convention. I was a state delegate for Nevada at Nevada State Convention in May. I was not a national delegate, but I am happy to say that I helped vote in an excellent, courageous delegation to go there. The Nevada delegation was officially pledged to support Mitt Romney in the proportion that Mitt Romney won the popular vote in Nevada during the first phase of the caucuses. However, what happened at the convention made it completely undesirable to maintain that particular promise, because it became very clear that the Republican establishment and the Republican National Committee do not play by the rules. Indeed, they change the rules whenever it suits their purpose of remaining in power without truly heeding the wishes of the people and the wishes of the activists within their own base. So essentially what has happened was the Rules Committee at the National Convention proposed a series of changes that would make it very difficult for anything like the Ron Paul revolution to occur again within the Republican Party. Up to now, delegates in states that held caucuses were determined by the states, by internal processes within those states. There are several levels of caucuses culminating at the state convention, and the delegates are elected by a majority of the attendees of the state convention. So this, of course, throws into the process the element of activism by the grassroots, by people who are really devoted to political principles and who, through their energy, through their involvement and power of persuasion, can determine who goes to the convention. The new rules state essentially that whoever the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party is, that is the person who gets to select the delegates from a particular state where that person has won the plurality of the vote from the primary or caucus. So that turns the system entirely on its head. Instead of being based at the local level and moving up from there, now the composition of the delegates to the National Convention is entirely dictated by the first past the post. Whoever the presumptive nominee is, he and his campaign choose who the delegates are. And there are other insidious changes in there, too. For instance, the Republican National Committee may essentially change the rules at will at any time. That's the short summary of what these new rules say. So whenever any existing set of rules is utilized in such a way that does not please the establishment can just say, oh, looks like we made a mistake with that set of rules. It didn't work out the way we wanted, so let's change it. The United States and any constitutional republic, any free country, is supposed to be based on the rule of law. The rule of law is supposed to be predictable and understandable. It is the opposite of arbitrary power. It is the opposite of arbitrary will. If a particular group does not like what a set of rules says, and that group has the full power to change those rules on the basis of that dislike, there is no liberty, there is no certainty, there is no rule of law. There's just the rule of men. And as Thomas Jefferson emphatically stated, we want the United States government to be a government of laws and not of men. Well, the Republican Party no longer adheres to that principle if it did adhere to scraps of that principle in the past. So now we have an oligarchic establishment in control of the Republican Party. And there were many Ron Paul delegates at the National Convention. However, their voices were utterly ignored. At the Rules Committee meeting, where John Boehner presided and he announced the changes, he called for a voice vote, and the nays clearly outnumbered the ayes, at least in terms of the volume. But John Boehner simply called the ayes, and he had a teleprompter telling him to do that. So this was a foregone conclusion. No matter how many people expressed their distaste for these rules, no matter how vocal they were, they couldn't affect the outcome. The game was rigged, ladies and gentlemen, and the honest delegates there, including a sizable fraction of the Romney supporters, had a perfect right to be outraged. And then John Boehner asked, "Is there any objection?" And the floor erupted in shouts of objections, and Boehner completely ignored them. This is just a perfect illustration of the state that this country is in. It is a perfect illustration of the glaring disconnect between the American people, individuals of a variety of political persuasions, but who genuinely want to live better lives and who genuinely want to solve challenging policy questions, and the political elites, who have become a class of parasites. This is no longer a question of one's particular ideology or persuasion, whether one is a libertarian or a more traditional conservative or a liberal Democrat or even a socialist or anarcho-capitalist or left anarchist, whoever you are. This is a serious problem because you don't have a voice. No matter what you believe in, if you're an ordinary individual of middle class or working class backgrounds or even upper middle class background, you don't have a voice. And now you don't have the opportunity to influence the agenda of the Republican Party. Because look, what I was able to do in getting all the way up to the Nevada State Convention and being a delegate and being able to speak there and being able to vote in a really good group of people whom I could actually converse with myself, you can't do that anymore, not under these new rules. It is futile now to try to work through the Republican Party to achieve political change, irrespective of what people like Ron Paul's son, Rand, who has endorsed Romney in exchange for pretty much nothing more than a speaking slot at the convention, would have you believe. You cannot work with this oligarchy and expect to get ahead. That's not what the oligarchy wants to do anymore. The oligarchy just wants a rubber stamp and complacency and acquiescence. Now, the Nevada delegation gave them something interesting. In the way the votes from the states were announced, if Nevada's delegates voted in proportion to the popular vote, as they were officially bound to do, the votes from Nevada would push Mitt Romney over the edge, and they would have assured him the Republican nomination. Dr. Wayne Terhune, the head of the Nevada delegation, did not want that to happen. He did not want that to weigh on his conscience. So he decided to let his delegates vote as they chose, as they personally preferred. And they did. And the majority of Nevada's delegation voted for Dr. Ron Paul. I'm immensely pleased and gratified that this happened, and this was the one silver lining in that whole farce of a Republican National Convention. Because when that happened, of course, the next state had to be the one that pushed Romney over. But Nevada didn't get that dubious distinction. It really shows that the spirit of liberty is very much alive in Nevada still. The spirit of individualism, free thinking, and courage to stand up for principles, stand up for the truth, at least as one perceives it, still exists. And really, it exists all over the United States. We still have heroic individuals in this country. We still have people who cherish the principles of liberty and reason and individual rights. The problem is, the political elites have closed off avenues for those people to influence the political system by working through the established channels, the Republican and Democratic parties. So what is there to do next? Well, certainly despairing and giving up hope is not the answer, because there is a lot of justified discontentment with the policies of the federal government today. The convention directed a lot of acrimony at Barack Obama, and Obama deserves a lot of that, because Obama's policies have led to horrendous infringements of individual liberty. Great examples include the TSA and its molestation of millions of American travelers, or the atrocities committed by the United States in Afghanistan, particularly with regard to the treatment of people who are just suspected of terrorism, with regard to the drone strikes, which kill many, many innocent civilians as part of so-called signature strikes that don't even have an official terrorist suspect as a target. And also, of course, with regard to the numerous crackdowns on economic liberty that have been persistent throughout the Obama administration. However, that's just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the Republican Party, which is just as much a part of the establishment as today's Democratic Party. And what many of the attendees at the Republican convention, Rand Paul included, conveniently forgot to mention is that the Republican Party is just as much to blame for the current crises in the United States. The rampant deficit spending, the rampant militarism, and the idea that any military spending is good spending. Rand Paul, in his speech, did try to address that. But I think the Republican elites are a very tough crowd to convince of even this kind of common sense reasoning. So, what is the solution? The solution is to break the two-party system. Because the problem is that many good people in this country will vote for Mitt Romney or will vote for Barack Obama because they consider one of these to be the lesser evil. Well, they're both the same, exactly the same in terms of their policies. If you want proof of concept, just think of the bailouts, which both of them supported. Or think of Romney's health insurance reform in Massachusetts, on which Obama's Affordable Care Act was modeled. Think about that for a moment. And if you experience polarizing divisions in the rhetoric that you hear in the news media or in certain activist circles, consider whether it's really a substantive difference or whether it's much ado about nothing. I believe it's the latter. We need a real alternative. Where do the supporters of Ron Paul go now? Up until now, Ron Paul was still in the running for the Republican nomination, even if his chances were not good. Now, Mitt Romney is the official nominee, so Ron Paul is no longer in the running. But there is someone who is still in the running, Gary Johnson, the candidate for the Libertarian Party, who holds the same ideals of liberty and individual rights and a free economy as Ron Paul. And he has the freedom to be even more overt and vocal about these ideals, because he is not weighed down by the same kind of baggage that exists in the Republican Party. A Republican Party politician like Ron Paul had to keep certain constituents happy, the theo-conservatives, the various social conservatives, who really were not very receptive, for instance, to ideas that the drug war should be completely abolished. or that same-sex marriage should be legalized. Gary Johnson can be a lot more vocal about these ideas because he doesn't have to worry about the theoconservative kinds of people. They wouldn't vote for a libertarian candidate anyway, but we don't need them. All we need are people of conscience, people who are willing to be creative in solving our current political problems, people who value liberty, people who see the pervasive policies that the political establishment dares not touch, policies like the war on drugs, which most people hate. Jimmy Carter came out in a very, very accurate editorial earlier this year, condemning the war on drugs. This made Jimmy Carter, of all people, my favorite living president. Jimmy Carter also came out with an editorial recently condemning the U.S. policy of militarism and torture and detention and complete abrogation of due process. If Jimmy Carter is coming out with these kinds of statements, then a lot of American people are also of the same mind. It's just the current elites that are completely ignorant. But in order for this to work, in order for solutions to be truly feasible, people need to break out of the lesser of two evils mold, the two-party mold. People need to have the courage to vote for an alternative. Some individuals who were enthusiastic about Ron Paul might say, well, this whole farce is just proof that the entire political system is broken, and it is, and that whatever we do will be futile. Well, I can sympathize, because certainly a lot of this does feel like one is just banging one's head against a wall. But what's the alternative? Is it to cede the political arena to the elites altogether? Some anarcho-capitalists who stayed out of the Ron Paul campaign altogether are probably saying, well, look, I told you so, because you expended all this energy, and look where it got you. You got hundreds of delegates to the National Convention, and then the elite just shut you down without caring what you think. So what does that tell you about the efficacy of political action? To that I say maybe, but maybe there's another way. Maybe if enough of us said, we want to break the two-party structure, and we want to support someone from a third party, where these elites are not in control, and where we don't need to go through them in order to obtain political legitimacy, then we might make a difference. Gary Johnson is already on the ballot in all 50 states. If you are eligible to vote, you can vote for Gary Johnson, so why not do it? Why not do it as a protest vote against the establishment? Maybe he won't win, but maybe it'll teach the Republican Party a lesson. If Mitt Romney crashes and burns this election season, then this will convey a clear message that manipulations of the rules, suppression of the will of the people, attempts to entrench an oligarchic establishment that has become so detached from anything anyone who really has any struggles in the world is concerned with, that's not acceptable anymore. And if that's not acceptable anymore, if these elites get the message, then they might start taking a softer line. And that's not going to be a complete solution. But in the meantime, we can chip away at the current problems in other ways through technological innovation. For instance, there are movements such as the seasteading movement, which proposes to create autonomous communities on the ocean, or the creation of new currencies like Bitcoin, which can serve as alternatives to the fiat money system that entraps many people in this inflationary upward spiral and a race to try to maintain their standards of living. Through technology that liberates the individual, we can gradually expand the sphere of individual autonomy. The old elites will gradually retire or die off and be replaced by others who grow up in a different world with a different set of assumptions. Maybe that's the solution. I do think that working through one of the two major parties is a lost cause. And Rand Paul's example clearly demonstrates this. I don't know what he was expecting when he endorsed Mitt Romney, but whatever it was, he didn't get it. He did not get the vice presidential nomination, and I'm sure he did not really get a whole lot of notice or respect or favors from Mitt Romney either. I think the Romney campaign did a very wise move from a tactical perspective when they persuaded Rand Paul to endorse Romney, because now Rand Paul is out of the picture as a potential adversary, and he has essentially neutered the Ron Paul movement by fracturing it into people who think that Rand Paul committed some sort of clever political stratagem for long-term gain, and people who were completely disgusted at a departure from principle. And so then the Romney camp, of course, because it was more unified than the Ron Paul movement, could seize the initiative and craft these rules changes and a lot of other deleterious changes that essentially cemented Romney's nomination. That's what happened. So trying to appease the Republican elite is not going to work. What's going to work is challenging the whole two-party system and also working outside the political process to create something that expands the sphere of individual autonomy. The Republican National Convention is not the end. It is not the defeat of the Ron Paul movement in the sense that Ron Paul has catalyzed a whole lot of changes. There have been changes to the Republican Party platform, however marginal they might have been. But more importantly, there are certain issues that are now the subject of widespread discussion. Issues such as the Federal Reserve and internet freedom and, hopefully, the perils of American militarism and excessive military spending, and the perils of the war on drugs and other interventions on personal freedom. Let's build on that. Let's capitalize on that by maneuvering around the elites instead of trying to get their assent. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope these thoughts will enable us to chart a way forward in spite of the rather tragic and disappointing events at the Republican National Convention.